You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo-jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops? And if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine.
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all, because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so
Craig
much.
Funky is flying me to the edge of a violent thunderstorm.
You see how nice and crisp the top of that cloud is up there?
Yeah.
But the former commercial pilot isn't some adrenaline junkie courting danger. He's a cloud seeder, chasing this menacing storm to squeeze out extra rain for the drought-stricken farmland below.
As a pilot going through school, you're taught to avoid thunderstorms.
This is Craig's job, firing chemicals into the clouds in a controversial attempt to modify the weather. He's literally a rainmaker.
That dark, thick cloud over there has lots of moisture in it.
That's part of the cloud that was seeded. It actually looks heavy with rain. Okay.
Oh, I see the flare.
Right? Yeah.
It looks like he's painting the sky.
The flares are shooting millions of silver iodide and calcium chloride particles into the cloud, where they collide with drops of water and ice and produce even more moisture. Then, usually within 20 minutes...
So what is this white smoky stuff over here?
That's rain.
Oh, that's rain.
Yeah, that's rain. All this is rain out there.
Don't worry if you can't hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. This is the loudest sound you could possibly conceive. And, as it turns out, the cleanest. Now, the most amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you! It's raining! That's unbelievable! Oh. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
Now to a dire warning about climate change. According to a new report, experts say that we have until 2030 to avoid catastrophe. It also says if unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet. The report focuses on what could happen if global temperatures rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. It would likely mean more erratic weather, dangerous heat waves, rising sea levels, and dying coral reefs.
Done, right? We've warmed the planet since 1900 with the Industrial Revolution by 1 degree. What has that brought us? Well, that's brought us record heat waves here. Look at this, 2015, 2016, and 2017, all those years, 3 of the hottest years on record. We know the heat waves have been ongoing. We've had, of course, more record floods. We have more significant droughts. We have all these events that are more frequent and more intense as a result of climate change.
The future is closer than we think and is not good unless we do something about it, according to the latest United Nations report on climate change. Most climate scientists think we're already beginning to see the extreme consequences of a warming world: severe storms, sea level rise and flooding in the Philippines and on the U.S. East Coast. Other consequences, crop failure and mass population movement, may also reach crisis levels in the next 20 years or so. All this will happen sooner than previously feared by the year 2030, the report says, if greenhouse gas emissions continue at current rates and global temperatures rise 2.7 degrees above what they were in pre-industrial times. In fact, we're already 2/3 of the way there.
So it's a challenge for human civilization.
Hitting the new lower target would require ending the use of fossil fuels in the next 30 years. The cost, an estimated $54 trillion, would be cheaper, they say, than dealing with the worst effects of climate change.
Climate scientists are issuing a final call to save the world from climate catastrophe.
Every bit of warming matters.
A landmark UN report says a global temperature rise of 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit is a threshold the planet cannot cross without seeing the worst effects of climate change. Scientists say if greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate, the atmosphere will hit a breaking point by 2040, inundating coastlines and intensifying droughts and food shortages.
There are signs that mitigation is going on, but if this is to be achieved, there's an urgent need to accelerate.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says nations need to boost the use of renewable energy like solar and wind power significantly in the next decade, and coal and gas plants must be equipped with cleaner technology.
Climate change is already affecting people, ecosystems, and livelihoods all around the world.
But experts are aware the political will to make tough choices to save the planet may not be there.
We've told you the scientific facts, the evidence, the costs. It is up to the governments now to decide what to do with it.
Let me be clear. Hurricane Michael is a monstrous storm, and the forecast keeps getting more dangerous. We are now just hours away from seeing impacts.
Now, unfortunately, there are going to be places that get more than 6 feet of storm surge flooding. Imagine this, 9 feet and even beyond of flooding, of inundation. This is practically not survivable. So please follow the advice of your local officials when they ask you to evacuate.
Now coming out of the Florida Panhandle, where Hurricane Michael made landfall just a few minutes before this broadcast, sustaining winds of 150 miles per hour. Over 150,000 homes and businesses are currently without power, and that number is expected to rise as I'm speaking to you right now, with millions more in Michael's path. The storm was a Category 2 until this morning, when it upgraded to a Category 4 storm. Meteorologists say this sudden change came as a result of the Gulf of Mexico's unreasonably warm water. While warmer temperatures haven't been proven to increase the number of storms, studies do show that storms become stronger and produce more rain due to changes in climate. Additionally, as a result of rising sea levels, storm surge is now worse than ever before, even compared with 100 years ago. Florida Governor Rick Scott issued a warning to Floridians this morning.
Hurricane Michael is forecast to be the most destructive storm to hit the Florida Panhandle in decades. This storm will be life-threatening and extremely dangerous.
However, the governor also stated that the time to evacuate has come and gone, recommending that those left in the Panhandle go to evacuation centers, essentially leaving citizens on their own. Among the concerns for those still in the path of the storm, flash flooding with heavy rain, life-threatening storm surges up to 14 feet high, and devastating winds. Residents on the ground expressed concerns.
I'm going to lose everything. I have the restaurant is my main source of income, and it's going to be shut down probably for the rest of the year.
With Hurricane Michael in question, we're joined now by Joel Siegel, co-founder of Justice Action Mobilization Network. Joel, meteorologists say Michael supercharged unexpectedly this morning from a Category 2 to a Category 4 storm. How did this happen?
First of all, it's an honor to be on RTV. This is we're in a climate emergency, and leading climate scientist Michael Mann and the IPCC has predicted this for years, and President Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress did absolutely nothing but deny climate change existence. Now we have billions of dollars of property, scores of loss of life, and it's real simple. The Earth's temperature has increased due to the burning of fossil fuels. That carbon has gone into the water where it's been absorbed, and the temperature has increased. So has the ocean's surface temperatures increased. When you have a hurricane, it supercharges the hurricane because the energy comes from the warm waters. And unless we go to 100% clean energy, 80% by 2030, the bulk of the transition in 10 years, by 2020, well on our way, what we're seeing will be the new normal. It's irreversible, and that is hurricanes that'll be life-threatening, forest fires, drought, excessive raining due to increased temperatures, more moisture in the clouds. So we're in a global crisis that's only going to be met if we, the people, demand that we get off of fossil fuels and transition to energy such as solar and wind and geothermal. We can't stay on fossil fuels any longer. We're at the breaking point. Climate change is here.
And Michael is a storm unprecedented for the Florida Panhandle, so people are certainly pointing that out. But I also want to talk about this issue of red tide. It's this toxic red algae that is now on all three of Florida's coasts. We've covered it a couple times here on In Question. How will this red tide be impacted by the storm?
Well, there's two possibilities. One possibility is that the storm will take the red tide, which is it's an algae, a toxic algae. It'll disperse it further outwards. The second possibility is that the increased rainfall will go over the agricultural spots of Florida and bring in pollution and hog waste, chicken waste, and then actually make it much worse where it already is, which would increase health threats to humans because it's toxic. It will also have much larger fish kills. So it's going to be either one or the other. If there's a storm surge, then that toxic algae will go into the estuaries, into the canals, and again, threaten more human beings. So it's either going to threaten them by having a larger bloom on the coast. It started on the Pacific coast and went to the Atlantic coast. But either way, it does not look good for that area. So this state's been devastated by a hurricane that was predicted by the great scientist Hansen of the Goddard NASA government agency that in the 80s warned of all this, and scientists have warned us for years, and we didn't pay attention to science because now we're a nation of climate denialism in science and physics because of Donald Trump and the Republican Congress. So we, the people, have to get organized.